لله رب العالمين وبه نستعين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد. السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Inshallah, today we'll be reciting from Surah Al-A'raf, Surah number 7 of the Qur'an, verses number 68 to 73, page number 159. Page number 159, verses 68 to 73. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أبلغكم رسالات ربي وأنا لكم ناصح أمين. أوعجبتم أن جاءكم ذكر من ربكم على رجل منكم لينذركم واذكروا إذ جعلكم خلفاء من بعد قوم نوح وزادكم في الخلق بسطة فاذكروا آلاء الله لعلكم تفلحون. قالوا أجئتنا لنعبد الله وحده ونذر ما كان يعبد آباؤنا فأتنا بما تعدنا إن كنت من الصادقين. قال قد وقع عليكم من ربكم رجس وغضب أتجادلونني في أسماء سميتموها أنتم وآباؤكم ما نزل الله بها من سلطان فانتظروا إني معكم من المنتظرين. فأنجيناه والذين معه برحمة منا وقطعنا دابر الذين كذبوا بآياتنا وما كانوا مؤمنين. وإلى ثمود أخاهم صالحا قال يا قوم اعبدوا الله ما لكم من إله غيره قد جاءتكم بينة من ربكم هذه ناقة الله لكم آية فذروها تأكل في أرض الله ولا تمسوها بسوء فيأخذكم عذاب أليم. صدق الله العلي العظيم.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
So when the Prophet of Allah came to the people of Mecca and they rejected his message and they said to him that we would have assumed that God would have sent an angel, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala now starts giving them examples from the Qur'an. And the first example that we looked at, examples from history in the Qur'an. The first example that we looked at was the example of Prophet Nuh. And the second example that we're looking at are the people of Ad, and to them came Prophet Hud. And we say that the people of Ad were situated in southern Hijaz, or in the place known as Yemen. And the prophets came to them with the same message over and over again, that we call you to worship only one God, and we don't ask anything in return from you. We neither want power nor do we want wealth from you. And all that we do, if you look at the first verse that we recited today, أُبَلِّغُكُمْ رِسَالَاتِ رَبِّي, all I'm doing is I am conveying to you the messages from God, وَأَنَا لَكُمْ نَاصِحٌ أَمِينٌ, and I am a trustworthy admonisher to you. Now, sometimes you find that when a person has objections and he gets worked up with his objections, sometimes it just helps to say what that person is doing, to point out how absurd it is what that person is saying. Sometimes they don't realize it themselves, You just have to put it into one sentence, right? So, for example, in the Jummah khutbah, we talked about the aid that America is giving to Israel, right? And it seems to be okay, but we pointed out how absurd it is. And one of the things that we say, which everybody knows, but we just have to say it, and then it puts things into perspective, that they don't have money to be able to have clean water in some of the cities in America, but they seem to have money to give to a third country. How absurd is that? It's obvious, but somebody has to say it. Or, for example, that football player, when he did not stand up for the national anthem, right? And people started making a lot of noise about it. The media made a lot of noise about it, right? Once again, when he didn't do that, they started questioning his personality, questioning his character. The next day in the media, right away they did that, okay? And then somebody pointed out how absurd it was what the media was doing just by saying it. They say that when they rise up and they protest, right, and they go to the streets, you say that they should protest silently. They should protest peacefully. Now, what is this guy doing? He's protesting peacefully, and you also have a problem with that. Right? But sometimes you just have to say the absurdity that the person is doing. This Prophet Hud, when he came to his community, and they had so many objections, he said, let me just say what you're trying to say. أَوَعَجِبْتُمْ, are you surprised? أَنْ جَاءَكُمْ ذِكْرٌ مِّن رَبِّكُمْ, that a reminder has come to you from God. What is surprising about that? God cares for you. He would send a reminder for you. عَلَى رَجُلٍ مِّنْكُمْ, and God has given that reminder to a human being from you, so that he does what? So that he rules over you? So that he, for example, does something extra special to you? No. لِيُنذِرَكُمْ. All he comes to do is to warn you. What's wrong with that? How absurd is your objection? وَاذْكُرُوا إِذْ جَعَلَكُمْ خُلَفَاءَ مِنْ بَعْدِ قَوْمِ نُوحٍ. Then he tells them, remember the blessings of God. One, he made you succeed the earth, rule over the earth, after the qawm of Prophet Nuh. وَزَادَكُمْ فِي الْخَلْقِ بَسْطًا. And he's increased you in your physique, in your body, he's made you bigger. Okay? If you look at the Arabic word there, it's pronounced basta and basta, with sin and with sad as well. Do you have that on your Qur'an as well? Sin and sad, both, right? So it's okay to pronounce it with sin and to pronounce it with sad, because there's a rule in Arabic that when sin and sad in some cases is followed right after or a little bit after with a ta, right? Then you can pronounce it both ways. For example, some of the scholars have said اهدنا الصراط المستقيم with a sin, اهدنا الصراط المستقيم as well. Okay? This is a rule in Arabic. In any case, it seems to us that by physique they were bigger. Their bones were bigger, their bodies were bigger, and therefore they were able to build bigger things. They were able to make bigger civilizations. Work was easier for them to do, right? They did not need to have tools sometimes because their physique allowed them to build. Now question, why is he reminding them of the blessings of Allah? The argument is over what? The argument is over the oneness of God and the prophethood of the Prophet and the Day of Judgment. They've reached a point and he's reminding them of the blessings of God. So you see, when you're arguing with somebody, sometimes he rejects your point because he can't understand it. He says, it doesn't make sense to me. And I'm thinking about it in a very unbiased way. For example, some people may come to you for whatever reason and say to you that, I don't see the proof for the existence of God, and so I'm an agnostic. Okay? And maybe this person got confused by the way he was raised, or there's an objection in his mind. So he says, I won't accept it until you explain it to me very clearly. That's one. But sometimes a person comes and he's not accepting your argument, not because he doesn't understand it, he understands it, but he's got a moral problem. He's got an ego. He doesn't want to accept it from you. If he accepts it from you, he has to say that what I've been doing for the last 30 years, what I've been believing for the last 30 years, all of it has been wrong. I made a mistake, right? That's very hard to do. Especially if they've become leaders, especially if they become popular. For example, like Charles Dawkins, right? Or Charles Dawkins is his name? Dawkins anyways, very famous atheist, wrote an important book, The God Delusion. Now let's say a person like that who's renowned to be an atheist, suddenly one day realizes that God exists, very hard for him to accept. Because now he has to come out in public and say, people, I made a mistake. Very difficult. So they realized that the arguments of Prophet Hud were correct, but now they were being stubborn. And because their ego would not allow them to accept it, to say that they were wrong. So he reminds them and says, why do you allow your ego to come in your way? Don't you feel embarrassed in the presence of God? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you so many blessings in your life. Would you still reject Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and all of these blessings just because of your ego? فَاذْكُرُوا آلَاءَ اللَّهِ لَعَلَّكُمْ تُفْلِحُونَ. No. One of the ways that you can overcome your ego, this prejudice that you have, is by remembering the abundant blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what did they respond? They responded by saying, قَالُوا, they said, أَجِئْتَنَا, have you come to us لِنَعْبُدَ اللَّهَ وَحْدَهُ, that we only worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? They had no problem worshipping God, by the way. They used to worship God. But the problem was, only God and only Him? None of the other idols? وَنَذَرَ مَا كَانَ يَعْبُدُ آبَاؤُنَا, and we should leave aside those idols that our forefathers used to worship? That's a problem for us. What was their problem? Their problem was to say that not only do we have to say we are wrong, we also have to say that our forefathers are wrong. And forefathers were very important to them. That should also be important to us as well, right? But that doesn't mean that just because something was believed 100 years ago, and it doesn't make sense to us right now, that we still continue to believe in that. Right? And therefore it becomes important as to who we take for our authorities in life. Okay? If we take, for example, the media as an authority, if we take society as an authority, if we take majority as an authority, right, then we'll put ourselves in a very difficult position. But if we take the Ahlul Bayt as an authority, and we know that they have been sent by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then we will not be in the same position as they are. فَأْتِنَا بِمَا تَعِدُنَا إِن كُنْتَ مِنَ الصَّادِقِينَ. They say, then bring us the punishment that you have been promising us if you are being truthful. So he responded, and listen to the response. قَالَ قَدْ وَقَعَ عَلَيْكُمْ مِنْ رَبِّكُمْ رِجْسٌ وَغَضَبٌ. The punishment of God, right, and the anger of God has already been destined for you. Even before the punishment comes, he talks about it in the past tense. Meaning what? This is a style in the Qur'an. When the Qur'an wants to talk about something and say that it is certainly going to happen, it talks about it in the past tense. The punishment of God has come over you, has been destined for you, it means, right? And then he says, what are you arguing about? You are willing to accept the punishment of God over what? Over these names that you and your forefathers have created in your imagination. Right? These idols that you worship. Their bodies, you make them. And their ideas, their names, you are the ones who created these names. They have no basis in human aql. They have not been revealed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to tell you that these idols are able to have any difference in your life. Why are you giving up your salvation over your things that you have imagined? Allama Tabatabai says, it's not only in the issue of Tawheed, but many a times when we make arguments about anything, many a times our arguments are wrong because they are based on certain assumptions which have not been validated. Okay? فَانْتَظِرُوا إِنِّي مَعَكُمْ مِنَ الْمُنْتَظِرِينَ. So wait, I am waiting with you as well. Beautiful. What is he telling them? I really enjoy thinking about these verses of the Qur'an. Because when you first look at them, you say, well, why is he telling them that I'm going to be waiting with you as well? I mean, wouldn't he want to leave now? And say, okay, before the punishment of God comes, I need to find my escape from here and go out. What's he telling them? He's telling them that don't think I'm going to run away, right? And disappear, and then the punishment of God doesn't come down. And I'm nowhere to be found, that you can blame me and say, hey, where's the punishment of God? No, I'm going to be right there. And when it comes, you will see me. And then I will leave after that. Right? He's saying, I'm that confident. I'm not going anywhere. Here I am. Right? With that confidence, he speaks to them. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَأَنْجَيْنَاهُ we saved him, وَالَّذِينَ مَعَهُ, and those who were with him, بِرَحْمَةٍ مِنَّا, with a mercy from us, وَقَطَعْنَا دَابِرَ الَّذِينَ كَذَّبُوا بِآيَاتِنَا, and we cut off the dabir. Dabir comes from dubur. Dubur means back or end. Okay? We uprooted them to the last one of them. Not a single one did we leave. Why does God make a point of that? These why questions are very important. Why does God emphasize that in their case? See, normally these societies, when they were promised the punishment of God, sometimes they used to take it in jest. And they say, okay, a storm will come, some thunder and rain will come, maybe an earthquake will come, and yes, we will lose some people, and maybe some houses will be lost, but the rest of us will be okay. We'll manage through it. We'll survive through it. We'll struggle through it. Maybe people who live on the outskirts of the city, they'll be affected by it. We won't be affected by it, right? We do the same in our lives as well. Say, okay, even if, for example, I went through hardship, maybe I'll lose some money, maybe I'll lose my business, but still my aql, my intellect, this resource, that resource, it will be with me, even if I disobey Allah. And God says, no. Our power is completely dominating. When our punishment came to the last one of them, not a single one did we spare. Right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shows His control and dominion. وَمَا كَانُوا مُؤْمِنِينَ, and everyone who was punished was not a believer. The next example, and we'll just quickly introduce it and end the tafsir for today. وَإِلَى ثَمُودَ أَخَاهُمْ صَالِحًا. The next example are the people of Thamud. And to Thamud we sent them their brother, somebody from them, his name was Salih. Now, Sulaiman becomes Solomon, right? Dawood becomes David. Isa becomes Jesus. Musa becomes Moses, for example. It goes very easy until you come to Salih. What does Salih become? So Salih, this story is actually not in the Bible. This story is only in the Qur'an. And this is because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is referring to a community that was in Hijaz, in Saudi Arabia. And perhaps the story transpired after the revelation of Injil, or when the Bible was written, for example, the Bible that is there in their hands right now. So there is no direct English translation. Salih is Salih. And the people of Thamud lived in Hijaz, between an area in Hijaz and between Sham or Syria. And I remember once I'd taken my children to go and watch an IMAX movie on Saudi Arabia. Okay? And they mentioned that the Islamic civilization was not the first civilization in Hijaz, in present-day Saudi Arabia. That actually, almost 8 to 9 centuries before them, if I'm not mistaken, there was another civilization that had also found itself in Hijaz, had established itself. And the name given to them was Nabateans. Nabateans. Okay? And they were civilization. They were advanced compared to those who were around them. They had some advanced technology, some advanced resources as well. And one interesting thing about the Nabateans that they mentioned in the movie, and that they have today as well, archaeologists have gone there and found there, is that they used to make big houses, and they have that, filmed it, it's there. Big houses in where? In mountains. Right? Inside the mountains, they used to carve them and make houses in those mountains as caves, for example, but they were proper houses, right? The Qur'an also talks about them. Okay? So let's read. قَالَ يَا قَوْمِ اعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ مَا لَكُمْ مِنْ إِلَهٍ غَيْرُهُ. The messages of the Prophet, simple messages, singular message. Every prophet by now, you have noticed, Nuh comes, worship Allah. First message, the most important message, worship Allah. Follow this argument. Hud comes, the first message, worship only one God. Salih comes, the first message, worship only one God. Therefore, anybody, if we want to claim that they were a prophet of God, what's the most important message that should be coming from them? Worship one God. Therefore, sometimes when we talk about people like Aristotle or Buddha, and people ask, is it possible that they could have been prophets of God? And some people say, well, maybe they were prophets of God. For me, there's only one litmus test. It's the most important thing that that person teaches, the worship of one God. If it is, yes, the possibility is there. If it's not, then no possibility. If you read the Quran, this is something that comes out as clear as day for you. Alright? قَدْ جَاءَتْكُمْ بَيِّنَةٌ مِّن رَبِّكُمْ. I'm giving you a clear sign from God. هَذِهِ نَاقَةُ اللَّهِ. What is a naqa? A she camel, a female camel. So a male camel is called a jamal, and a female camel is called a naqa. This is a camel of who? Naqatullah, the camel of God. Meaning, this has been sent to you by God. Right? It is a special camel, not just any camel of the earth. Right? And we know, for example, from the ahadith, that it was a big camel, it was huge in size, it had certain qualities, and it was a miracle sent to them by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. لَكُمْ آيَةً, as a sign. فَذَرُوهَا تَأْكُلْ فِي أَرْضِ اللَّهِ. And you know what? You'd have no responsibility towards this camel. The only thing we ask you is that you leave it, let it eat from the land that God has created. You don't have to feed it, just don't hurt it. Okay? وَلَا تَمَسُّوهَا بِسُوءٍ. Don't hurt it. فَيَأْخُذَكُمْ عَذَابٌ أَلِيمٌ. Regardless of what you've been doing, all the immorality aside, still the punishment of God will not come down as long as you don't touch this camel. Well, what did they do? Inshallah, we'll continue next week after we have recited those verses. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.